The courtroom felt colder than it should have, as though the air itself recoiled from what was about to happen. Veronica Lane stood between two deputies, wrists locked in steel cuffs, her posture straight, but her skin drained of color. The judge's voice cut through the hush like a blade, steady and official, announcing her sentence: 10 years in state prison. Gasps rippled across the benches. Veronica didn't flinch. She simply stared forward, as if the sound couldn't reach her anymore. To her right, her husband, Tony Rivero, leaned back in his seat with a smirk stretched lazily across his face. His expensive suit caught the light, but nothing overshadowed the ugly satisfaction shining in his eyes. He didn't even try to hide it. Seated beside him was his mistress, Danielle Russo, draped in a tight black dress, crossing her legs with deliberate confidence. Danielle tilted her head toward him and whispered something that made Tony chuckle under his breath. The sound was quiet, but to Veronica it echoed like a cruel victory bell. Her entire life, her marriage, her child, her reputation, had been dismantled in this room. Every accusation Tony had manufactured, every piece of falsified evidence he'd submitted, had built the tidy little box the court now sealed around her. The deputies moved to escort her out. Chains rattled softly as she turned away from the bench. Humiliation burned her skin, but underneath it, something colder flickered. Not fear, not defeat, something that felt like the edge of resolve. As they guided her down the aisle, past reporters and spectators craning for a better look, Veronica leaned slightly toward the older deputy on her left. Her voice wasn't louder than a breath. "I need to pass a note," she murmured. "It's legal. Check with your supervisor if you must." The deputy hesitated, wary of trouble, then nodded. Veronica shifted her hand as much as the cuffs allowed and slipped a small folded paper into his palm. Her handwriting inside was brief, just a name and a number. Nothing more. He unfolded it discreetly as they reached the back door. "Call Michael O'Bannon." The deputy's eyes twitched, recognition or maybe just caution, but he said nothing. Veronica didn't elaborate. She didn't need to, because Tony didn't know. He never had. He thought she was alone, unprotected, abandoned by everyone who mattered. But her biological father, the man whose existence Tony dismissed as nothing more than a rumor, was very real, and he had power that Tony could never fathom. As the heavy doors closed behind her and the clicking of cameras faded, Veronica lifted her chin just enough to steady herself. She let Tony believe he had won. Let him savor this moment, the humiliation, the spectacle, the fall he thought he orchestrated so perfectly, because he had no idea whom that deputy was about to call. He had no idea what was coming. The prison transport rumbled away from the courthouse, its steel frame vibrating with every pothole on the Newark Turnpike. Veronica sat on the narrow bench, hands cuffed to a chain secured to the floor, her breathing steady but shallow. Across from her, the older deputy, the one who had taken her note, shifted discreetly, pretending to adjust his radio while he dialed the number she'd given him. He kept his voice low. "This is Deputy Harris. I'm calling on behalf of..." Whatever he expected, it wasn't the instant response. His posture stiffened. "Understood," he said, swallowing hard. "We're en route." He hung up, avoiding her eyes now, as if what he'd done placed him in the center of something much larger than he could comprehend. 10 minutes later, the van slowed unexpectedly. Veronica felt it before anyone said a word. An unnatural deceleration, not part of a scheduled route, not anywhere near a detention facility. The driver cursed under his breath, tapping the brake again. Then the van lurched to a full stop. Deputy Harris peeked out the small front window, and his face drained. "We've got vehicles blocking the road." 3 black SUVs had sealed off the asphalt, angled like a barricade. Their tinted windows reflected nothing. The other deputy reached for his holster, but before he could react, Doors opened and several men stepped out, calm, precise, not threatening, but purposeful. The rear van door swung wide. A man in a dark coat leaned in, speaking evenly. "Ms. Lane, Mr. O'Bannon requested your immediate relocation." The deputies looked trapped between protocol and survival instincts. Veronica simply nodded. She was uncuffed and transferred into one of the SUVs. The doors shut with a polished thud, sealing her inside the quiet leather interior. No one spoke during the drive. City blur turned into wooded seclusion, and soon the convoy passed through iron gates flanked by stone pillars, her father's private estate on the New York side of the Hudson. Inside, Michael O'Bannon stood waiting beneath the high arch of the entry hall. Gray hair, tailored suit, eyes sharp enough to cut through anything soft. The air around him felt heavy with authority. Veronica stepped forward, her voice tight. "Where is my son?" Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "First, you will compose yourself." "I want to see him," she said again, louder this time, anger cracking through her restraint. "You will," he answered, "when you're ready. Not like this." He signaled to two house staff. "Get her cleaned up. Fresh clothes. She will not face that man looking defeated." The order wasn't cruel, it was final. Veronica clenched her jaw as the staff led her away. She understood the message beneath his words. She would see her son, but only after she stood tall enough to take him back. The guest wing of Michael O'Bannon's estate looked nothing like the world Veronica had been dragged through these past weeks. Warm light filtered through tall windows, brushing over polished wood floors and soft cream-colored walls. Two women from the household staff guided her inside, speaking gently but with the unmistakable firmness of people who answered directly to Michael himself. They led her to a private dressing suite. A steaming shower waited, the mirror already fogged at the edges. Veronica stood still for a moment, her reflection blurred, almost unrecognizable, not because of the steam, but because she no longer looked like herself. Her hair hung in tangled waves, makeup from the hearing smeared, bruises of exhaustion beneath her eyes. The jumpsuit she wore only amplified the sense of defeat Tony wanted her to embody. She stepped into the shower, letting the water wash away the courtroom, the sentence, the humiliation. It didn't erase the pain, but it stripped the dirt from it, leaving the emotion sharper, cleaner, more precise. When she emerged, the staff had laid out clothing unlike anything she'd owned in years. A fitted, charcoal gray dress, understated but lethal in its elegance. Soft black heels, a tailored coat with structured shoulders, makeup arranged neatly beside a professional styling kit. "Mr. O'Bannon said you should be presented with dignity," one of the women explained. "Nothing flashy, just undeniable." They worked quickly, blow-drying her hair into smooth waves, restoring the natural shape of her brows, evening the skin tone that stress and betrayal had ravaged. When they finished, they stepped back to let her see the results. Veronica turned toward the mirror. For the first time in months, she recognized the woman looking back. Not the prisoner, not the accused, not the prop in Tony's carefully engineered downfall. A woman who had been pushed to the bottom and had found something steel-hard beneath the rubble. Her posture straightened. Her breathing deepened. She wasn't healed. She wasn't even close. But she no longer looked like someone who could be erased with a court order. A soft knock sounded at the door. Yuri Markov, her father's longtime lieutenant, entered wearing a freshly pressed suit. His tie was dark, his expression sharper than she remembered. He studied her with a professional eye, then nodded once. "Better," he said. "You'll need to hold that expression tonight." "What's tonight?" Veronica asked. He exchanged a glance with one of the staff before answering. "Your husband is hosting a celebration," he said. "He's calling it a victory party. Business partners, friends, some officials. He's expecting praise." A cold, clean wave of understanding passed through her. Mr. O'Bannon believes, Yuri continued, that if you're going to confront him, it should be on a night when he feels untouchable. Veronica's fingers tightened around the edge of the vanity. She would walk into Tony's victory party not as the woman he had tried to destroy, but as the woman he had underestimated, and that, she realized, was her first real weapon. The celebration was already in full swing when the black SUV rolled to a stop outside the upscale Manhattan venue. Laughter spilled from the open terrace, mixing with the clink of glasses and the low hum of live music. From the outside, nothing hinted at the storm about to walk through the front doors. Veronica stepped out first. The cold night air brushed over her dress, sharpening her focus. Yuri followed a step behind, scanning the surroundings with calculated precision. They didn't need invitations. They had something stronger, purpose. Inside, the ballroom glowed with warm chandeliers and expensive floral arrangements. Dozens of guests mingled, dressed in polished suits and glittering gowns. At the center of it all stood Tony Rivero, champagne flute in hand, smile wide and triumphant. He was mid-sentence, boasting about justice finally being served, when he saw her. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Conversation froze around the room. Heads turned. A ripple of confusion, then shock, spread through the crowd. Danielle Rousseau, clinging to Tony's arm like a decorative accessory, stiffened as her eyes darted from Veronica's face to Tony's panic. Veronica walked forward slowly, deliberately, heels echoing against the marble like distant gunshots. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every step dismantled Tony's sense of victory. "You look surprised," she said softly when she reached him. Tony swallowed hard. His composure cracked, exposing something feral beneath. How are you here?" Danielle edged behind him as though trying to become invisible. Veronica tilted her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know everything." "Tony." The words hit him harder than any accusation could. His breathing quickened. His eyes flickered, searching for an escape, an ally, anyone. "There's someone you're going to see," she continued. "Both of you." He shook his head, voice trembling. "Veronica, don't do this here." She leaned in slightly, enough for only him to hear. "Follow me. Now." Yuri stepped forward, making it clear this wasn't optional. Tony hesitated, but the room's silence pressed down on him. His guests watched with wide-eyed discomfort, unsure whether they were witnessing a marital dispute or the unraveling of something far darker. Reluctantly, Tony followed. Danielle, pale and shaking, trailed close behind, clutching her purse as if it could shield her from what was coming. They exited through a side corridor, leaving behind murmurs and confused stares. Veronica led them to a quiet parking area where a second SUV waited. No one spoke during the drive. The tension was suffocating. When they arrived at the modest Newark bungalow, Tony stopped short. "What is this?" he whispered. Veronica opened the door. Inside stood the terrified notary, the man who had falsified the documents that helped frame her. "This," she said calmly, "is where your victory ends." The heat of the small sauna clung to the air like a second skin. Steam curled from the wooden benches, fogging the narrow windows and blurring the outlines of the trembling man seated inside. The notary, Arthur Klein, looked nothing like the confident official who had signed away Veronica's life weeks ago. His face was slick with sweat, his hands shaking violently as he clutched a towel around his waist. He jolted upright when the door swung open. Veronica stepped inside with quiet precision, Yuri behind her, blocking the only exit. Tony and Danielle hovered in the doorway, frozen in a mix of fear and disbelief. Tony's earlier bravado had evaporated. Now he looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing solid beneath him. Arthur's voice cracked. "Please, don't hurt me." Veronica didn't move closer. She didn't need to. Her calmness was more dangerous than any threat could ever be. "Relax, Arthur," she said softly. "No one is here to hurt you. I just want the truth." He swallowed hard, looking from her to Tony, then back again. The look in his eyes said everything. He knew he had chosen the wrong side. She crouched down, lowering herself to his eye level. "You forged documents used in my case. You falsified signatures. You certified statements you knew were lies. And you did it under someone's pressure." Arthur's breathing quickened. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice," Veronica interrupted. "You made the wrong one." The silence that followed was blistering. Arthur's voice shrank to a whisper. "They threatened my family, said they would destroy my business. I didn't know it would go this far." "You knew enough," she said. Her tone wasn't loud, but each word carved deeper than a shout could. She reached into her coat and placed a clean sheet of paper on the small wooden table, along with a pen. "This is your confession. You'll write down exactly what happened. Every detail, every signature you forged, every statement you certified under duress. And who gave the orders." Arthur stared at the paper as if it were a live wire. Tony paled. "Veronica, don't!" "Quiet," Yuri warned, stepping forward just enough to make Tony retreat. Veronica never took her eyes off the notary. "Arthur, you will sign this. Not because I'm asking nicely. Not because you fear what happens if you don't. But because you finally understand that the people you protected will let you rot the moment you stop being useful." Arthur's shoulders collapsed. The towel slipped slightly as he reached for the pen, hands trembling uncontrollably. He wrote quickly, sweat dripping onto the page. When he finished, he signed his name with a shaky stroke. Veronica picked up the paper, reading only long enough to confirm the essentials. Blackmail, forgery, falsified evidence orchestrated by Tony Rivero. Her prison sentence hadn't been justice. It had been a conspiracy. And now she had proof. The study in Michael O'Bannon's estate was nothing like the sterile courtroom or the suffocating transport van. It was warm, dignified, lined with dark shelves and leather-bound folders. A room built for negotiations that could reshape entire companies or destroy them. Veronica sat at the long mahogany desk, the soft glow of a banker's lamp casting a narrow circle of light over a single manila folder. Tony's folder, the same one he had proudly presented to the court to portray himself as a responsible, stable father. The same one he had used to help justify taking her son away. Her father stood a few feet away, arms crossed as he watched her with the steady, assessing gaze of a man who had learned long ago that truth was rarely gentle. "Read everything," he said quietly. "Every line." Veronica opened the folder. At first, the contents looked routine. Pediatrician reports, growth charts, copies of hospital discharge summaries. But then halfway through, she saw something that made her breath lock in her throat. Blood type B positive. She blinked, rereading it, her pulse beginning to throb in her ears. Her own blood type, O positive. Tony's, A negative. She wasn't a geneticist, but even she knew what that meant. She flipped quickly through the pages, searching for explanations. Clerical notes, anything. There was nothing. Her fingers shook slightly as she turned to the next section. Medical records, this time not for the child, but for Tony. A sheet, clipped to the top, bore a stamp from a private urology clinic he had visited years earlier. Diagnosis, azoospermia. Complete infertility. Duration, long-standing. Irreversible. A harsh, brittle sound escaped her. A breath, a choke, something between disbelief and fury. Tony had been infertile long before she became pregnant. Long before he celebrated the pregnancy. Long before he convinced her she was carrying his miracle. Michael watched her carefully. "Keep going." She did. At the bottom of the folder was a scanned, notarized contract from a reproductive clinic in Manhattan. The text was cold, clinical, and mercilessly clear. Donor embryo transfer. Patient consent. Signature on file. Except the signature wasn't hers. Not even close. A faint buzzing filled her ears. The room seemed to tilt, her vision tightening around the printed words. She traced the forged signature with her thumb, her chest rising and falling too quickly. She had carried a child, carried him, birthed him, loved him, without ever knowing the truth of his conception. Not a mistake, not an accident, a fraud, a violation so profound it reached into the most sacred part of motherhood. She pressed the folder shut, fingers trembling. "He used me," she whispered. "He used my body. For this." Michael didn't soften. He simply nodded once. "Yes. And now you understand the magnitude of what he's done." Her world had been cracking for months. Now it shattered. Michael's estate had many rooms that felt intimidating, but none unsettled Veronica as much as the small sitting room where her mother waited. Nina Lane sat on the edge of a velvet armchair, fingers twisting anxiously around the strap of her purse. She looked smaller somehow, older, thinner, as if the lies she carried had begun to erode her from the inside out. Veronica stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The quiet click echoed sharply. Nina rose halfway, uncertain whether to reach out or stay back. "Veronica, I didn't know if you would agree to see me." Veronica didn't sit. She kept her distance. "I didn't agree." He insisted. Nina's eyes flicked nervously toward the hallway, then back. I wanted to explain." "No," Veronica said. "You're going to tell the truth. All of it. And you're going to start with why you helped Tony." Her mother's mouth quivered. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that," Veronica cut in. "You signed off on things without telling me. You stood beside the man who destroyed my life. And you helped him. Voluntarily or not. Your reasons don't matter until you say them out loud." Nina sank back into the chair, covering her face for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, trembling. "Tony promised he would take care of me. After your father left, I had nothing. No stability. No future. No protection." She wiped her eyes quickly. "He said if I helped him, just with paperwork, nothing big, he'd make sure I never had to worry again." Veronica's stomach twisted. "So you sold me for security." Nina flinched, but didn't deny it. "I didn't know everything he planned," she whispered, "but I knew enough, and I still did it." A heavy silence settled between them. Veronica exhaled slowly, forcing steadiness into her voice. "What else did you do, Mom?" Nina looked away, shame dragging her gaze to the floor. "He needed evidence tying Michael to old crimes. He said if we could make it credible enough, we'd control the narrative. You'd get custody. We'd be safe." "You fabricated evidence against Michael O'Bannon," Veronica said, voice flat. "You tried to frame him for something his rival committed." Nina nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Tony told me what to say, how to say it, who to call. I thought we were securing your future." "My future?" Veronica's voice cracked, not from weakness, but from a kind of grief deeper than betrayal. "You helped him take my child. You helped him put me in prison." Nina sobbed quietly into her hands. "I never meant for it to go that far. I didn't know he'd use it to." "Yes," Veronica said. "You did." Nina froze. "You always knew what Tony was capable of, and you helped him anyway." The words carried no rage, only final understanding. Veronica stepped back toward the door. "You didn't just betray me," she said softly. "You betrayed the truth. And now everything you tried to manipulate is collapsing." She opened the door, her voice almost calm. "This ends with all of your lies exposed." And Nina knew it was true. The tension inside Michael O'Bannon's estate snapped the moment Veronica stepped out of the sitting room. She and Yuri were halfway down the corridor when a sudden commotion echoed from the study. Papers rustling, a chair scraping, hurried footsteps. Yuri reacted first. "Stay here." But Veronica already knew who it was. They reached the doorway just in time to see Danielle Russo, her face pale, eyes wild, yank open the lower drawer of Michael's antique desk. She grabbed the small black cassette tape lying inside, stuffing it into her purse with shaking hands. "Danny!" Tony shouted, stumbling into the room behind them. "What the hell are you doing?" Danielle didn't answer. She bolted toward the back exit, heels clattering across the hardwood floor. Veronica followed her to the threshold, arriving just as Danielle shoved open the fire stairwell door. Her footsteps spiraled downward, echoing in quick, frantic slaps. "Yuri!" Veronica said sharply. "I'm on her," he replied, sprinting down another route to cut her off. But Danielle moved with desperation, the kind born from sudden clarity. She burst out of the back of the estate and sprinted across the dimly lit courtyard, fumbling in her purse for keys. Her red sports car flashed under the floodlights, a bold, reckless choice that now betrayed her location. She dove inside, started the engine, and peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching across the gravel. Tony erupted from the door seconds later. "That idiot!" he hissed, sprinting toward his own car. Veronica and Yuri reached the top of the hill overlooking the driveway just as Tony roared onto the road, headlights carving through the darkness. The chase began instantly, Danny weaving through the empty nighttime highway, Tony accelerating behind her with terrifying intent. The Hudson River glinted to their right as the cars shot across the bridge, engines howling. Veronica gripped the metal railing, breathing hard as they followed in a separate SUV with one of Michael's drivers. On the highway below, Danielle swerved violently, trying to gain distance. But Tony was unrelenting. He smashed into her rear bumper once, then again harder. Sparks scattered from metal scraping metal. "Tony, stop!" Veronica whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. Her voice trembled with a mixture of horror and grim inevitability. Danielle's car fishtailed, skidding across 2 lanes. She lost control. The red coupe spun, collided with the guardrail, and came to a wrenching stop against a concrete barrier under the bridge's shadow. Tony braked hard, his car slamming to a halt beside hers. Veronica and Yuri stepped out onto the embankment above, watching the scene unfold in helpless silence. Tony stormed to Danielle's door and ripped it open. "Where is it?" he shouted, grabbing her by the arm. "Give me the tape." Danielle screamed, clutching her purse like a life raft. "You're finished, Tony. Everyone will know, everyone." Her voice cracked through the darkness, sharp enough to carry all the way up to where Veronica stood. Below them, Tony lunged for her bag again, his rage blinding, his control gone. The night had swallowed every lie he'd built, and now Veronica saw the man he truly was, undisguised, desperate, and dangerous. The crash had already drawn attention. A few late-night drivers slowed, pulling over on the shoulder of the bridge. Headlights flickered across the twisted metal of Danielle's red sports car. The cold wind carried the sound of her screams before anything else. Tony yanked her by the arm again. "Where is the tape, Danny? Give it to me." Danielle's hair clung to her face, her mascara streaked from sweat and fear, but she didn't back down. She pushed him hard, stumbling out of the car. "You want the tape?" she shouted, voice cracking but loud enough to echo beneath the bridge. "You're terrified someone will finally hear the truth, aren't you?" A couple standing near their parked SUV pulled out their phones, recording. Tony froze when he realized he was being filmed. "Stop recording," he barked. But Danielle only stepped closer to the growing audience, raising her voice. You all want to know who this man is? He's broke. Completely bankrupt. Every dollar he bragged about gone. A murmur rippled through the bystanders. More phones rose into the air. Danielle jabbed a shaking finger at him. He stole millions from his own partners, laundered money, lied to everyone. And this tape, she slapped her purse, is the only thing protecting me from him. From the hillside above, Veronica watched in frozen disbelief as Danielle hurled the truth into the night, tearing open the image Tony had spent years manufacturing. Yuri stood beside her, expression tight. Down below, more cars stopped. The crowd grew. Livestream icons flashed on screens as people filmed from multiple angles. Comments flooded in instantly, names, tags, shocked emojis, disbelief. Danielle continued, hysteria mixing with triumph. You think he's powerful? He's nothing without that tape. Nothing but a liar and a coward. Tony snapped. He lunged, grabbing her purse and shoving her against the crumpled door of her car. Danielle screamed. The crowd gasped. Several people shouted for him to stop. Veronica's breath caught. He's unhinged, she whispered. Yuri had already pulled out his phone. Police are on their way. Below them, Tony wrestled Danielle to the ground. Cameras caught everything. The violence, the rage, the exact moment his fist connected with her shoulder as she tried to shield herself. Sirens wailed in the distance. Bright red and blue lights flooded the bridge within seconds. Step away from her! Officers shouted as they swarmed the scene. Tony froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for two officers to tackle him to the pavement. Danielle curled into herself as paramedics rushed toward her. Phones kept recording. The scandal Veronica couldn't expose herself had exploded in public, carried by dozens of witnesses, streamed live to thousands. In the glare of patrol lights, Tony Rivero was handcuffed and dragged to his feet. An entire city saw the truth. The fallout from the highway incident unraveled quickly. After the public arrests, Tony Rivero was released on bail, though his reputation had already shattered. Veronica knew the tape held more than financial ruin. Something darker pulsed beneath it, something that had terrified Danny enough to steal it in the first place. 2 days later, in the secluded meeting room at Michael O'Bannon's estate, the truth surfaced. Yuri placed an old portable cassette player on the table. Veronica sat stiffly, hands clasped, while Danny, now bruised from the altercation but defiant, watched with wary eyes. Tony, handcuffed and escorted by officers, stood across from them, his expression twisted with resentment. Michael nodded at Yuri. Play it. The tape crackled to life. At first, only muffled voices drifted through. An argument in a hallway. Footsteps, a door slamming. Then a man's voice emerged, clear and deep. It wasn't Obolensky's. It was Victor Rivero, Tony's father. Tony flinched. The recording continued, revealing a heated confrontation, threats, and finally a fatal blow. A body hitting the floor. Heavy breathing. A panicked whisper. No one will trace this back to me. Veronica's pulse stopped. This isn't Obolensky. Danny stared at the floor, tears rising. I didn't know. Tony told me it was his rival. He said Obolensky killed that man. He made me believe. Michael raised a hand. Listen. The tape rolled on. The next voice belonged unmistakably to Veronica's mother, Nina. Calm, calculating, giving instructions on how to edit surveillance footage, how to splice frames, how to fabricate a shadow that would implicate Obolensky instead. Tony's face drained of color. She knew, Veronica whispered, her voice hollow. She helped him. Yuri shut off the tape. Silence collapsed over the room like a weight. Danny looked at Tony as if seeing him for the first time. You lied to me, she said, her voice breaking. You've lied about everything. Your father killed that man. You helped hide it. You framed someone innocent. I defended you. I defended all of it. Because I thought you were protecting us. Tony tried to step toward her, but the officers held him back. Danny, listen. It wasn't supposed to go like that. My father, he was— No, she screamed, shoving a chair aside. You're worse than he ever was. She lunged at him, fury and betrayal ripping through her voice. You made me part of this. You dragged me into your family's crimes. Tony recoiled, the officers quickly restraining her before she could strike him. Veronica watched the scene unfold with a numb, distant ache. Everything she thought she understood about her own downfall twisted into a new shape. The real killer had never been Obolensky. It had always been the Riveros, and her own mother had helped bury the truth. The courthouse parking lot was still in chaos when officers moved Danielle toward the back of a police transport. Reporters yelled questions, cameras flashed, and the scandal surrounding Tony Rivero swelled by the minute. Veronica stood several yards away beside Yuri, the weight of the tape's revelations still pressing into her chest. But amid the noise, a detail slipped past the distracted officers, Tony's eyes scanning the periphery, tracking every movement with a predator's focus. One officer opened the rear door of a patrol car to load evidence. Another turned his back for just a second. It was enough. Tony lunged forward, shoving the officer off balance. He slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it before anyone could react. The engine roared to life. Rivero, step out of the vehicle, someone shouted. Tony didn't hesitate. He hit the gas, tires screeching as the cruiser fishtailed out of the lot. An officer dove out of the way, just in time. Veronica's blood ran cold. He's running. Dispatchers immediately broadcast the alert. Sirens erupted across blocks as units mobilized. But Tony already had a destination. Yuri cursed under his breath. He's going somewhere he can hide. Somewhere he knows. Veronica knew instantly. Her father's rural lake house. The place she'd grown up spending summers, the closest thing she'd ever had to a real childhood. And the place where Nina often stayed. Her stomach clenched. My mother. Tony drove hard, weaving through traffic, pushing the patrol car past its limits. By the time he reached the wooded outskirts of the lake property, dusk had begun to settle. A soft orange glow stretched across the water. Birds scattered as the stolen cruiser skidded to a stop on the gravel drive. Inside the house, Nina stepped into the hallway, confused by the sudden noise. She opened her mouth to call out. Tony grabbed her from behind. Her scream never fully formed. Within an hour, the entire property was surrounded. SWAT vans blocked the winding road. Tactical teams took positions behind trees and stone planters. Negotiators set up a command post near the boathouse. Blue lights strobing across the water. When Veronica arrived, running past barricades, she saw the silhouette of her childhood home engulfed in police floodlights. The porch where she'd once played with a stray kitten now held a sniper team lying prone. Her breath hitched painfully. She's inside. A negotiator approached. MS. O'Bannon. Tony Rivero has taken your mother hostage. He's demanding a helicopter and safe passage across state lines. Veronica pressed a hand to her forehead. He won't get far. He knows that. He isn't thinking rationally, the negotiator said quietly. He's panicking. From the upstairs window, a lamp was thrown to the floor. Glass shattered outward. Nina's muffled voice cried out, pleading, begging for calm. Veronica's knees nearly buckled. She had faced Tony's lies, his rage, his crimes, but now he had her mother's life in his hands, and the night was far from over. Inside the house, the tension crackled like static. Tony Rivero paced erratically across the second-floor hallway, dragging Nina with him whenever she stumbled. The stolen patrol lights flashing through the windows made his shadow stretch and twist against the walls, making his panic even more visible. Outside, SWAT edged closer. He could hear them, The bullhorn boomed. "Mr. Rivero, put down your weapon and release the hostage. There is nowhere left to go." Tony's breathing turned ragged. Sweat streaked down his temples. He shoved Nina toward the bedroom and locked the door, leaving her sobbing behind it. His mind raced, clawing for any exit, any path out of this tightening noose. And then he remembered. The old tunnel, a relic from the estate's earliest days, his hiding place as a child during summers spent there with Veronica, a place no one else knew existed, or so he believed. He bolted down the stairs, knocking over a chair. He moved the grandfather clock aside and tore up the loose floorboard beneath it. A darkened wooden hatch groaned as he forced it open. The air below smelled of damp earth and rotting timber. He climbed down and slammed the hatch shut just as SWAT breached the back door. Up on the lawn, Veronica froze at the sight of officers entering the house. She ran to the negotiator. "He's not going to stay up there. There's a tunnel beneath the living room. It leads to the old root cellar behind the ravine." The negotiator stiffened. "You're certain?" "Yes," she insisted. "He used to play there when we were kids. If he's desperate, that's where he'll run." Before the man could radio it in, heavy boots approached behind them. It was Michael O'Bannon, her father, dressed in a dark coat, eyes sharp with a kind of cold focus Veronica rarely saw. "He's in the tunnel already," Michael said quietly. Rivero never had imagination. He always runs back to the same hiding places. Veronica turned to him, stunned. "You knew he would." "I hoped you would remember in time." Michael signaled Yuri, who immediately relayed orders to the tactical commander. Within seconds, units repositioned around the ravine, forming a perimeter at the other end of the underground passage. Inside the tunnel, Tony ran through the narrow, dirt-walled passage, panting, nearly slipping on the uneven floor. The flashlight he'd grabbed flickered, throwing warped shadows ahead of him. The air grew colder, the ceiling lower. Behind him, echoes erupted, boots dropping onto the tunnel ladder. Officers had breached the entry point. "Rivero, stop where you are!" Voices thundered, amplified in the confined underground space. Tony scrambled faster, scraping his shoulder against the wall. The root cellar door appeared ahead, a sliver of moonlit air filtering through its cracks. But as he reached it, the ground trembled. Outside, Michael had stepped closer to the ravine edge. "That tunnel was never stable," he murmured, almost to himself. "He shouldn't have gone there." A deep rumble sounded, then another. The earth beneath the ravine shifted. Inside, Tony froze. Dust rained down. A beam snapped behind him. Officers shouted for him to move. But the tunnel groaned like an injured animal. And then the collapse began. The courthouse was packed long before the hearing began. Journalists lined the marble steps. Cameras angled toward the heavy oak doors as if waiting for a verdict on the entire city's conscience. Inside, the gallery buzzed with restless anticipation. The scandal had already consumed headlines: the stolen money, the falsified documents, the underground chase, the collapse of the tunnel. But today promised something more. Today, every lie would be spoken aloud. Veronica O'Bannon entered with a poise that felt carved from stone. She wore a simple black suit, her hair pulled back, her expression controlled. The hush that followed her down the aisle was immediate. Even the judge paused to watch her take the witness stand. Across the courtroom, Tony Rivero sat, shackled at the defense table, pale, gaunt, eyes hollow. His lawyers whispered frantically, but he hardly seemed to hear them. Every camera in the room pointed toward him. Veronica placed her hand on the railing, steady, unwavering. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Ms. O'Bannon, please explain to the court how the defendant utilized your financial accounts." Her voice was cold, precise. "He stole millions over a period of 4 years. He laundered funds through my business accounts, forged my digital signatures, and created offshore transfers under my name. Every transaction is documented. Screens lit up beside the jury, displaying wire transfers Tony once thought no one would ever uncover. Murmurs erupted. The prosecutor nodded. Now explain the medical evidence. Veronica inhaled slowly, as if bracing herself. Tony has been medically infertile for years. His condition was confirmed long before my pregnancy. He knew this. Yet, he submitted fabricated medical claims to court to present himself as a healthy and capable father. A courtroom monitor displayed the sealed urologist report, Tony's signature at the bottom. A gasp rippled across the room. "And the child?" the prosecutor asked. Veronica's eyes darkened. "The embryo implanted in me during our fertility treatment was donor-derived. I never consented. Tony orchestrated the procedure, bribed the clinic, and ensured the child would not be biologically his so that he could later claim sole parental rights once he removed me from the picture." The judge leaned forward, stunned. "Are you saying the defendant used fraudulent genetic material without your knowledge?" "Yes, Your Honor," Veronica answered. "He falsified every document." Phones vibrated across the gallery as the revelation blasted online within seconds. Hashtags exploding, public fury igniting like dry tinder. "And your mother?" the prosecutor continued quietly. Veronica hesitated only once. "My mother, Nina O'Bannon, conspired with Tony to secure inheritance advantages. She doctored evidence, altered surveillance footage, and supported the false narrative that framed an innocent man for murder." The jurors exchanged horrified looks. A tremor passed through Tony's body. His head dropped into his hands. His shoulders shook, not with regret, but with the crushing weight of exposure. The truth had finally stripped him bare. The judge called for order, banging the gavel repeatedly. But even the sharp cracks couldn't drown out the roar of public outrage swelling inside the courtroom. When Tony finally lifted his face, he looked toward Veronica, not with defiance, but with the expression of a man watching his entire world disintegrate. And for the first time, he understood there was no lie left to hide behind. The final sentencing took place on a cold morning, the kind of gray, muted dawn that seemed to dim every sound around the courthouse. Yet, inside the packed courtroom, the tension was electric. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder. Spectators filled every bench. Even the hallway beyond was clogged with people waiting for a verdict years in the making. When Tony Rivero was led in wearing his county-issued jumpsuit, a hush fell over the room. His once expensive haircut had grown uneven. His shoulders, once squared with arrogance, sagged beneath the weight of shackles. He no longer looked like a businessman or manipulator of empires. He looked like a man who finally understood what he had destroyed. The judge read each charge slowly: fraud, embezzlement, medical coercion, tampering with genetic material, conspiracy, obstruction, and Tony barely lifted his eyes. When the final sentence was delivered, 28 years without parole during the first term, a murmur rippled through the room, not of triumph, but of exhausted relief. Tony didn't respond. His mouth simply fell open, as if the air had been punched out of him. Veronica watched without blinking. There was no satisfaction on her face, no visible triumph. Something deeper held her still, something almost solemn. Justice had arrived, but not with noise. It came like winter, inevitable, quiet, and cold. Her mother was called next. Nina O'Bannon walked into court trembling, her hair disheveled, her face hollow. She sat before the judge as prosecutors listed her charges: evidence manipulation, accessory after the fact, participation in inheritance fraud. Nina broke down midway, covering her face with trembling hands. She received a suspended sentence, mandatory psychological treatment, and a prohibition from handling any estate-related affairs again. As she was escorted out, she dared to look at Veronica. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The distance between them had become a permanent landscape. Next came the final clearing of a name long buried in falsehood. Obolensky's family sat in a small group in the second row. When the judge formally declared the murdered man's innocence and stated that the Rivero family had engineered the entire frame-up, a soft gasp echoed from his widow. She covered her mouth, tears falling silently. It had taken years for the truth to surface, but it had finally arrived. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Questions flew, but Veronica didn't stop to answer any of them. She simply stepped into her father's waiting car. Yuri held the door for her without a word. Days later, in a quieter family courtroom, the final piece of her life was restored. Custody. She held the judge's signed order in trembling fingers, the seal embossed deeply into the paper. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like returning to the surface after being underwater for far too long. When she walked out into the hallway holding her son's small hand, sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Dust motes drifted in the golden air. She didn't smile. She simply breathed. Michael O'Bannon stood waiting at the end of the corridor. His expression held neither pride nor pity, only acknowledgement. A father's recognition of a daughter who had walked through fire and come out the other side without screaming. That evening at home, Veronica sat in the quiet living room while her son played on the rug. No reporters, no police, no chaos, just the sound of a child stacking wooden blocks. It was in that silence, heavy, full, and deeply human, that the full weight of justice settled. Not loud, not vengeful, but undeniable. And finally, after everything, enough?